Hello, everyone. Richard Carlton here. Welcome to another awesome day of FileMaker training. It's currently Thursday, and we are on day 8 of 10 for the FileMaker free training. So today, tomorrow, Friday, and a bonus round of Monday. So Leland's got a double header. I don't know how he's going to do this. I guess he has to eat his Wheaties and take his vitamins and get a good night's sleep. He will do the live stream at 1 o'clock Pacific time, and then he will be doing at 3 o'clock Pacific or 6 o'clock Eastern time. He will start the paid training. Now, you can attend live if you want on Zoom. However, the idea is that it will be recorded. You'll have access to that. So if you check out the website right here, you go to fmtrain.tv and you can see the live training button on the left, but you hit the right button there. It says JavaScript training. Press that button right there. And then it moves us forward to the Leland Long. It talks about the free training right there at the top right, and then the bottom right is the paid course. A number of you are buying this training. We greatly appreciate your support in Leland. By doing that, you're encouraging him to come back to do more training. We have a video. We're going to be getting this loaded up and posted and sent out to everyone, which is kind of an outline of what we talked about. What's going on week 3? So week 1 and 2 are free, but they're really the basic learning, the training on JavaScript. Week 3 is going to be about using JavaScript, everything that we learned, plus some additional elements to build a React Native application with a React Native framework, which is basically Facebook. Once again, it's not Mac, it's not Windows, it's Facebook. Facebook doesn't care what kind of computer you use. And the idea is that you code this and then you can output it to either Android device, phone, or a iPhone of some type, an iOS device. So it's pretty great. And so that is what the paid training is for. Week 3 starts Monday, this coming Monday, later in the afternoon. So Leland is picking up day 8. There's been all sorts of sample file shenanigans. So Margaret, instead of me trying to explain to people what's going on and naming and stuff like that, you want to explain people where we're at with the sample files?
Yeah, sure. Currently we have 4 sample files in total. Each like 102 and 103 both have their own sample files. The PDF sample file is fixed. I'll be reposting that today. The jQuery sample file has been revved, so you can go back and re-download it from the email that we sent you initially. The same link will work, and you should see a revision of 1.1 on it.
All right. Well, what are we doing today, Leland? It's something. Do you have PDF library again today? Is it more of the same, or is this from yesterday?
This is day 2 of PDFEditor, which I've called JavaScript 103. So
Okay,
yesterday we got a good start on it. We stopped, and now today we continue.
Okay, cool.
So yesterday, as a quick recap, we started on this page where we introduced the fact that we're using 2 web viewers on the screen now. And you click init and you get some information up here. And this is actually where all of our JavaScript and HTML and everything goes. This one's empty yet. And when I hit run, we generate a PDF via code, via JavaScript. We pass it back to FileMaker and dump it into this web viewer, and it renders it as a finished PDF. And we added a block of text to it. So that's as far as we got yesterday.
Okay.
Now we move on to section 2, which today I've called console. And I'm going to click init up here, and we've done the same thing that we've done before. We'll look at scripts here in a minute, but that's all of our work going on in here. If I right click on that and bring up the web inspector, and if we scroll way down, since the PDF library was also inserted into our web viewer, there's a lot in here. So there's a lot to scroll. I'll try to grab this little scroll bar, go to the very bottom. There we go. And now we can actually see our custom code, which you can see right here in script, right there. There's our custom code, and we'll look at that here in a minute. But that's the web viewer where all the work is being done. So we'll move that back off screen. And when I hit run, we purposely have introduced an error so that we can do some error checking. And somebody was asking for, hey, how do you do problem solving when you're doing JavaScript? Well, this should kind of aid you in that. So we've got a pop-up custom dialog from FileMaker. And this is what we passed into it to show onto the screen. And it showed that our create PDF function, the try, failed. And so it triggered the catch method. That should sound kind of familiar if you were with us yesterday, and we'll look at that again today.
Yep.
And this is what JavaScript generated in that catch error, which should help aid you to try to figure out, okay, well, something failed, but what? And what it's telling you is that this long function name right here is not a function. And it's telling you where it's at and it gives you as much information as it can do. We're going to click cool to make that go away. We're going to go back to our web inspector, look at the console, and we dump the same message here. So now that you kind of know what's going on this page, we're going to go take a look at the code to see exactly what we did. But in this page, we're purposely introducing an error.
Okay.
Totally makes sense?
Yep.
So here, as I told you yesterday, these scripts that we used yesterday, there was 4 of them in total, did all of the work of populating our web viewer. And from now on, we're going to combine those all into one script. So here's that script. Here's our 19 lines of library. Line 47 is where we concatenate them all together to end up with one variable. Then we have a separate variable for our custom JavaScript, a separate variable for our HTML template. And then this final HTML combines all of that together, including some substitutions so that we replace our placeholders here in the HTML template with actual code. So the substitute function in FileMaker is used to do that. You're on this line 58. And then finally, we dump the entire contents into our tiny little web viewer up there where all of the work is being done. And as you saw yesterday, whenever I introduce some JavaScript in this particular demo file, down below, I do kind of a walkthrough with some things that are kind of new to you, with some reasons why it was done, and some reference materials that you can go look out on the web to explain it a little bit further. So with all of that, let's look at the code. So got a bunch of white space in here. Matter of fact, it's quite a bit. Now, as we did yesterday, I'm going to copy all of this over to Visual Studio just to make our lives a little easier maybe and colorized so that we can scroll through it and see things side by side. Here's what we're looking at. Okay. And pretty much what we have is exactly our same function from yesterday. That's where we import 3 objects from our library. This is our main function being created here. This comment here. And this comment down here visually separates our function within a function, so like a subfunction, which is called create PDF. So from yesterday's lesson, if you were with us, this should look familiar. It hasn't changed much except for one line, and that's right here. And I've just added some text to the actual function just to purposely break it. So I added the underscore purposely misspelled. And so because that is inside of our try block, code block, remember a code block is the curly braces. Yeah. Since that is inside there, this try is going to fail. So if a try fails anywhere inside of its code block, it's going to run the catch block. And so we capture the error that was generated here in the parameter of the catch block, and then we can tell it to do anything we want with the error. And I chose to do 2 things. Number 1, we dumped it to the console log in our web inspector, and I passed it on to FileMaker to our script called FMP console, which you've seen several times over the last several days.
Yep.
And this time I created this to go to our console, which is create PDF try failed with a catch, and then I passed in the error that we got back just so we could see what it looked like and what it contained to see if it was helpful at all. I did the same thing in the console, passed in the error. By the way, you may or may not have seen that before. The console log takes typically 1 parameter, but it can take an optional second parameter, and actually more. You can actually pass in a whole bunch of parameters. And what it does is that the first one is a string, the second one is a value that you want to pass in. And I might have that wrong. You might be able to pass in either strings or objects all the way. I don't know, but this is how I use it. I tend to put in a string that tells me when I'm looking in the console what I'm looking at. This is what I describe. And then I'll also pass in outside of double quotes, so it's just there by itself. This is the error here. It passes that object in so I can look at it because I have no idea what I'm going to see. So this helps tremendously in debugging when you run into an error to actually see what the error was generated in JavaScript to be able to try to understand what the heck's going on. And of course, that error is going to be different every time based upon what is generating the error. So that can be used for your own learning as far as what kind of errors are common to see, what it looks like, what you can start to expect to see with an error. You just accidentally learn when you dissect that. So I'm sending it to 2 places, the console log in the web inspector and to FileMaker. Okay. Now this entire function starts here, as you recall. From outside JavaScript, we're going to call this function, and that function actually just does this. That's all it does. and it simply calls a asynchronous subfunction right here inside the quotes that we've been looking at. And if it returns successfully, then it runs this if state, this then statement, dot then, this block. Now, what's interesting with this error, I don't know if you've caught it or not. Let's go back and look at the web inspector right here. Here's the error that was returned, but what's below that? Create PDF function successfully completed. Well, that's kind of contradictory, isn't it? Well, it's interesting because what happened is that we called this function create PDF. And it's right here, and it starts to run, and the first thing it does is try this. Well, we know it failed and ran the catch, but the try failed. The function didn't fail. So this function we called create PDF actually completed successfully, even though it had an internal error. So that's why the dot then ran, and our console log put in create PDF function created successfully completed, because this function technically ran just fine. So that's kind of a gotcha to kind of wrap your head around the fact that we had a failure, but yet it seems to be successful. Hopefully you can kind of see that you might look at this as a parent-child relationship. This is the parent function that ran successfully. It's the child function whose try failed. So inside the child, we caught it, we did something with it, but the parent was successfully ran all the way through. Little complicated, but this is a good time to kind of look at little gotchas like that so that we can start to understand that they can happen and why they happen. So that's about as far as we're going to take this particular section. It's mostly just kind of understanding, hey, you can use the console log in the web inspector. You can pass data back to FileMaker. If we take a look at our global variable for that console, here's the entry that we received back on the about 7 minutes ago.
Yeah, when I dropped off, that you were trying to explain how it created the PDF but still had an error. So does anyone have questions about that?
So if you had the function return false, that wouldn't happen? Question mark.
I believe returning a Boolean false, I don't know if that clarifies as a failure or not, because you're just returning a value. The fact that it returned the value means that it was successfully returning a value. That would still be a successful function call. So really the only way you're going to have, we go back and look at the code while we're talking, I think about the only way you're going to have this fail is if you have something seriously wrong to where the parent function up here was not able to do something correctly. And I'm not sure of an example of how that would fail. So most times than not, you're going to see your dot then work just fine, and your internal try catch is going to catch the minor errors that was inside the child function.
Ah.
So it's tricky.
Question.
Sorry?
If you had the function return false, that wouldn't happen? Question mark. And then he added within the catch block.
Yeah, let me kind of repeat, I think, what I said yesterday. This async function is going to try everything inside this block of code. If any of this fails for any reason, for example, if this function doesn't exist because I purposely misspelled it, it's not, it's probably not going to return anything because the try did not succeed. It's going to trigger the catch down here. So it's not going to return anything. The catch is going to be triggered, and anything I told the catch to do inside this code block is going to run. And that can be empty. You don't have to do error handling, right? It would just quietly fail.
Okay.
But in this case, I told it to do two things. Okay, there's an error. Pass me the error information both to the console log and to FileMaker. And that can happen if anything in this code block fails. It's not going to hit this return and return anything.
Well, I was just going to say that the catch is interesting because you could say it could fail quietly. So just because the catch is there doesn't mean you have to actually loudly do something, would be the truth.
Right. Yeah, it's totally up to the developer how you handle that. Yeah. So if you left the catch blank, it would be kind of like FileMaker script step to set error capture on. It just quietly fails. No alert. It just moves on.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's expected behavior depending upon what it is you're attempting to try. So with that, I think we're probably safe to move on. If somebody has some more questions on that, we can get to it in here in the next section. So I'm going to run this and kind of walk through it, and then we're going to look at code. We're going to hit init. That's going to populate our content up here in the small web viewer, but you notice now we immediately had a PDF created on the init stage. We haven't done that before, right? Usually we hit run to generate something.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at the subtle changes I made to make that happen. We have a button here, which is another function now in our JavaScript, and I'm going to click that, and we get back this information. And it's an object. Let me see if FileMaker, let me blow that up a little bit. We get back a JSON object, and I'm just leaving the raw object here in the field. Of course, you could parse that with FileMaker's JSON functions to parse out the W and the H and do with it whatever you wish. But what is this returning? This is returning the size of this page in pixels or points. So the width is 595, the height is 841.
But back up, it's 595.28
Mm-hmm.
inches would make sense, but points.
Well, it's not
pixels.
595 inches by any stretch. It's probably in points. It probably has something to do with dimension and resolution settings of however PDFs render. Not sure,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, you're dealing with some
Yeah,
decimals.
with,
So
with 0.28, that's definitely going to be some sort of retina display or something like that. If
Yeah.
it was just 72 dots per inch, you wouldn't have a decimal
exactly
that fine, I should say.
right. So today with high def, you kind of have to change the old rules, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let me zoom that back out to normal. Let's look at some code. So here's when we hit the init button, this is the function that runs. There's our entire library. Everything looks the same as before. Here's our JavaScript, but I've added something down here that we didn't add previously. And that's this section here. After we've populated our web viewer on line 60 with our code, I'm doing what we kind of briefly mentioned the other day, which is add a slight delay of 1/10 of a second. And that's because we have to wait for all of that stuff to be loaded into our web viewer. It takes time. Not much time, but a little bit of time.
A second isn't very much time. Is that generally enough?
That you have to kind of find a sweet spot. It depends on what you're putting in there. Depends on how much JavaScript is running with anonymous functions that have to run immediately. If you did an anonymous function on a ton of data that runs immediately and it's looping through 1 million records and parsing stuff out, this delay might need to be 10 minutes before you're going to get a response to call another function. A lot of things depend upon that.
And this gets also back to the idea that you have locally up here at the top, you have local, I'm going to put my annotate on over here, but you have locally, this is the code. Normally you would download it, but it's now local here. So it loads much faster because it is local, right? So,
yeah, you're not relying on pulling that data down from the internet.
If you were pulling it down from the internet, then that delay would be substantially longer. Right.
Well, substantial in computer terms, right? In CPU cycles. So substantial might mean you might need to change this to a 1/2 a second instead of a 1/10 of a second.
Well, yeah, but off the internet, that could take it 2 or 3 seconds to download the library, right? So
well, you do have a point there.
Right.
Yeah. And plus then you have the option inside your JavaScript of doing something after the document is ready, right? So you might use that in conjunction.
Yeah.
To where FileMaker is triggering and saying, okay, the document is now ready. So now do something with it, and then you don't have to do the wait, right? Then you just have to
I'm just pointing out that because some people be like, oh, I always want to get a fresh one off the internet. And there's times when timing could be a challenge with that, because you're going to put a domain in, it has to resolve the domain, then go and get the data and fetch it and bring it down. And so, so anyway.
Good points.
All right, off we go. Keep going.
So in this case, we've loaded everything in our web viewer, wait 1/10 of a second. Then we call a function in our web viewer just immediately. The create function that we looked through yesterday. And we do a little error checking to make sure that that worked. And that's all we do. So what that did when I ran it, if we go back to layout mode, browse mode to clear everything out, when I hit init, it loads all the page in here, waits 1/10 of a second, runs our create, which sends the created PDF back to FileMaker, and we dump it here in this web viewer, and there it is, all in one step now. And of course, that could be on a script trigger, right? That could be on record load. So then you don't need any init button at all. Boom, you come to a record, there's the PDF. No buttons. So I'm using buttons to kind of slow things down so we can take it step by step. It's not necessary. So once that code's in there, now if we go take a look at their web inspector, we won't see it there. That's just nothing but a PDF. This one has all of our JavaScript and library and everything else. So if we go up to this web viewer, bring up the web inspector, look at sources, and scroll all the way to the bottom again where our code resides. Come on, give me a thing is finicky. There it is. Scroll all the way down. Here is our script, right? And all of this looks familiar. We've been doing it till now. That's our create PDF, but now I have a second function down here that's new called PDFEditor _ get size. And you see I separated it with this comment so that you can visually see the difference between two major functions. And this one has two shorter ones to separate the primary parent code versus the child sub function or subscript sitting inside here. So that's the difference between the lengths of my comments there, in case you're curious. So now we're going to step through that now that you've seen it, now that you kind of know what's going on. I guess I should explain. When you hit that get size button, this is the function that runs, right? And it returns data back to FileMaker when it's done getting the size so that we can get our results back and do with it what we wish. All right, time to look at scripts. That populates our web viewer, both with our working content and also the other web viewer with our initial PDF that's created. This is what runs when we hit the get size button. And this just simply calls, in our working web viewer, calls our new function that we've added. When the PDF is created and it sends the information back to FileMaker, this is the script that runs. So you've seen this before. This is where we grab everything that's coming in. We just dump it straight into our web viewer, and that renders the PDF. This is a new script. This is what runs after we get results back from the get size function, our new function. So again, we take the entire contents that we get and we dump it into this text field. And that's where you saw that object with the W and the H. Make sense? Let's look at JavaScript code. And again, I'm going to copy all of that, move it into Visual Studio Code so that we can look at that. Go ahead, Mark.
Yep, okay. Will the dimension calculation be the same on Mac, Retina, and Windows, or do we have to deal with it ourselves, or is it independent?
It is dependent on the library on this line right here, which is the PDF document create. If we go look at our documentation, go into the API PDF document. When we hit the create function here, this is going to determine that size. It has nothing to do with what program you're running it in, what environment you're running it in. It has to do with the create options where you can actually pass in the size. And we haven't seen that yet, but we're getting to the point where I'm going to be trying to find that. But that's the code line that creates the PDF and that determines the size.
Okay.
Does that kind of answer the question? We kind of have to defer it till later, really, but that's the answer. It has nothing to do with Mac or Windows or FileMaker or what FileMaker version, none of that.
Okay, next question. Is it like the pipe in DOS in sending the result to a function? Oh,
that's the arrow function.
I didn't realize. Okay, I didn't realize that was part of the question. I'm sorry.
They're referring to the arrow function right here. That was defined back on day 1, maybe day 2. One of those 2 days. No, probably day 1 was hello world. Day 2 was when we started getting into syntax. Go back to day 2 and refresh your memory on functions and anonymous functions. And ES6 gives you the ability to look to create functions using the arrow shortened syntax. You can also jump quickly over to W3 schools and look at functions somewhere and it'll describe arrow functions. So that's what you're looking at there. Not sure what the pipe or anything else was. Good questions, but we've already covered that. So we don't want to recover that again today. Okay, let's look at what we're doing here. So we slightly changed our create PDF script function. Sorry. Let's kind of look through this and see what we did. Well, we've got our create a brand new document. We've done that before. We've embedded the font Times Roman. We did that before. We added a new page, did that before. So instead of 0 pages, we have 1. We drew some text on that page, which states creating PDFs in JavaScript is awesome. We gave it some attributes and it did that just fine. And last time we were returning the save as base64 results. This time we're storing that in a variable instead of returning it because we're going to do some more stuff. Okay. Now this is optional. This is another way of doing the same thing, right? Instead of returning this and exiting, we're actually storing this in a local variable called PDF data URI. And then I'm dumping something to the console log. Straight string, create PDF function successfully saved and sent to FMP. And then the next line is actually directly sending that data back to FileMaker. Here, instead of down here in the dot then. So I kind of want to show you can do it in either place. Now, if you're bored someday, you can sit down with a JavaScript master and you can argue back and forth of which is the better solution, better option. Do you do it here or do you do it down here? And I guarantee you will start a conversation and you will hear opinions, and an expert out there would probably tell me why I probably might not want to do it this way. It's beyond JavaScript 101, 102, and 103. That's advanced topics. It works. And what I heard from one engineer I like, which is, hey, if it works, knock yourself out. The argument's kind of invalid as long as it works for you. If you run into problems, now you might want to take a look at why you might want to do it differently. Now, once I've sent it to the console log, once I've sent it to FileMaker, then what am I returning here? I am returning the original created document and its pages. I am not returning the base64 encoded version. That's kind of why I changed it around here. I wanted to return the library's version of what I'm working with. Why? Because I want to use it again later. I want it to capture it and store it so that I can use it again later. I don't want to have to reload it from an encoded base64 encoded string, which is what I need FileMaker to have in order to render it in the web viewer. Okay, so I'm returning something different this time. Now I still have my catch down here. If it fails, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to dump to the console log in FileMaker, so that didn't change. So down here, you'll notice we've added something here. Here's our dot then, and this is what I'm going to get back, that new object, right? What am I going to do with it? Well, first of all, I'm going to put a console log. Hey, this part successfully ran. And what am I doing with that return doc, that root object that's very JavaScript and library centric? It's not something FileMaker can understand. It's not something I even want to send to FileMaker. It's the raw object still within JavaScript. What am I doing? I'm setting it to something called global PDF doc. Well, what the heck is that? It's up here at the top. I had snuck in a new line for you. So this is another little introduction to scope. Remember how I said whenever we ran into differences in scope, I would try to stop and explain that rather than try to cover it on day 2, which is kind of complicated. So what's going on? Well, to place a variable outside of all of our functions, to have it at this root level, means it's going to treat it like a global variable in FileMaker. It means the entire session, as long as this stays alive in a web viewer, I can access it because it's globally scoped. As long as the web viewer stays alive, it's going to sit in there. Okay. If I declare it here inside of a function, just like in a script, this variable dies as soon as this function is over and done with. I don't want it to die. I want to access it later. So how do I do that? I store it in a global. Now I can call it anything I want. In this case, I called it global. That's not a requirement, right? We learned that on day 2. What your naming requirements are. It can't start with a number, right? All of that stuff. So I named it global PDF doc. And when I get this temporary PDF doc back, when it's all done, it's all rendered, I've got the text on there, I've got one page attached to that doc, I send it back here with return it. And what do I do with it? It ends up here in my dot then, and I store it inside that global. Now up here at the top, you notice it's undefined. I did not give it a value here, but we learned also that's valid, right? You don't have to assign a variable. I just can't use that variable until I define it somewhere. Well, here it's defined. Okay. So here's where I'm storing that for later. Now I also have a dot catch here. That's new. We haven't seen that before. That's if this create PDF fails. Now that doesn't mean if the try fails, right? We saw that before. It's going to catch that up here. But if for some reason the create PDF thing fails for some reason, I'm going to do some more error handling now. Again, that's optional. And from my experience in working in JavaScript, I pretty much never see this trigger. So I'm not even sure how you can get that to fail, but it's an option. So I'm handling it just in case. Okay. So that's that function slightly modified. And here's our new function. PDFEditor get size. And this one's no async going on, no try catch. This is back to kind of much simpler functions, right? So what are we doing? Look what I'm doing here. I'm taking that global variable and I'm assigning it to a local one here in this function. Now this variable is going to die as soon as this function's over with, right? This one's going to stay there. So I'm going to assign, this would be the same thing as taking a global variable in a script and assigning it to a local variable. Totally valid, right? Is it required? Of course not. But it's kind of a nice way of working with this document here or doing something with it. In this case, it's going to be read-only. I'm not going to make any changes. But when I reference it here, I kind of would like to have it local and not totally work with the global because I don't want it to change. I don't want to touch it. So it's kind of a preference. I don't know. I don't really know if it's really even a best practice. It's something I chose to do, and that would be another argument with an expert as far as whether that's necessary, good idea, performance issue, all of that stuff. So I've converted my global data over to a local one. Then what am I doing? I'm creating a variable, and I'm going to call a function on that entire document called getPage. So the getPage function is right here. And this is where we say, okay, if this document has multiple pages, I want to grab one. And it's 0 indexed. Sound familiar? So it's kind of like an array. So the first page is 0, the third page is 2, the 198th page is 197. And it's going to return a PDF page object, not a PDF document object. It's going to return a page. So this grabs the very first page of my document, and now I have a variable that stores that page. And what type is it? It's the type PDF page here in the library. So if I go to PDF page over here, now I can see what all is available on a page. Different set of properties, different set of methods. So with that page, I'm going to run a method called getSize. Well, in documentation, that's right somewhere. That's, if I can get my mouse to cooperate, getSize right here. This is this method. And this is how to get the width and the height from the size. It's going to come back as an object with 2 key value pairs in it. And the height is going to be a number and the width is going to be a number. It returns an object, right? So this documentation is very useful as far as finding something you want to do on a page, finding out what it looks like, what it's called. Then you can actually go and look at the description and see how to use it, what it's going to return, and all of the particulars. So this documentation is the key to using a JavaScript library. David Angel on Discord asked, the documentation, is it specific to PDF library? If you look at the URL, this is where you can learn and download and do anything you want with the library called pdf.lib-lib. So this is the documentation for this library. And that's the library we imported into FileMaker, and that's the library we're using. So I don't know where it got kind of confusing there, but hopefully that explanation makes you shake your head going, nod your head, yes, going, oh, okay, I get it. Okay. So we're in PDF page. We are in getSize. We are looking at what it returns. Now we go back to code. So this is going, now that you haven't seen this before, this is interesting. This takes the object that we're getting back from getSize and it splits it out into my own named variables. Now I can call these, I think you have to call them exactly what they do right here. I haven't tried to change that. I don't know if you could change that or not. I don't know if I could call it W and H and if it would work or if it would fail. So, but anyways, I like to use the exact same naming convention they are, so I'm getting what I'm expecting. So we know this works because I use it. And the next line of code, I'm going to generate my own object. I'm going to convert their object into my own. I'm calling mine JSON dimensions. Here's the curly braces where I'm defining an object, and I'm using key value pair with a key of W and a key of H with their values for width and height. So this is how you can take some results you get back and change it to how you want it to be, because that's what I pass to FileMaker. And that's what you see in that text field as the end result. Now, as you know before, you can't pass objects to FileMaker. You have to pass strings to FileMaker. So this built-in function called JSON.stringify takes anything that's not a string and converts it into a string. Pass that on to FileMaker so it can chunk on it all you wish. And in FileMaker, if you forgot what that looked like already, that's what generated this content here. My own custom object passed to FileMaker as a string. So. Stu is asking, you can have an object with just values, no keys? No. An object is key value pairs. You have to have a value for every key. Now you can put in, double quotes to make it an empty value, but you can't have a list of keys. That's not an object. Okay. So with that, we can move on. to our next section, which is we're going to add some text. So let's try playing with it first, and then we'll go look at code. We hit init. We get our working code inside this web viewer. We get a beginner PDF right here in our web viewer. We've scooted their text up a little ways. We can hit the get size button. It's not required, it's optional, but if so, it just works like it did before. But now we can add some text. So if we want to add the word watermark at position 40, 40 pixels or points across, 600 up, now we can take a look at our width and height values to figure out, kind of eyeballing it approximately where that's going to be, right? 600 up out of a total of 841, might be around in here somewhere. 40 out of 600, it's going to be way off to the left side because we know from before that this is 0, 0, this bottom left corner. And our width height corner up here, this is our 598, comma 841. With a rotation of 0, let's hit add text, and there's a teeny tiny little watermark right there at 4600. No rotation. Totally makes sense? So with that, we can look at code.
Can you explain constant width height? Looks like values only to my basic understanding.
Constant width height.
I
Is
might
that
be-
this documentation right here?
Yes.
So this method is returning an object. Here's what the object is going to look like. It has two key value pairs. The first pair is width with a value. The second pair is height with a value. That's the object it's going to return. So over the last several days, you've kind of seen objects occasionally. Anything that you do in FileMaker with JSON, you're dealing with objects. So this is the same concept. This is going to return an object with two key value pairs in it. And this describes down here what those two key value pairs mean and what they're going to look like. They're going to be numbered. The values are going to be numbers. So the end result is that's what it returned. That's what it looks like. There's the object we got back. Scroll over right there. In FileMaker terms, that's what that object looks like. Two key value pairs, W and H. Now, again, in code, I converted what they gave me to my own object to pass to FileMaker, right? So I created my own object with two key value pairs. And I kind of mimicked what they did. The first one was width, the second one was height. But I called them W and H instead. And there's the two values. So I don't know how I can describe it a little bit better than that. Okay, so let's go look at code. Add text. Here's our web viewer code that's going to put in our library, our custom JavaScript, our template, plop it into our web viewer, and then waits 1/10 of a second, and it runs the PDF create function to get our initial PDF. Here I've got some JavaScript walkthrough of some stuff that's new, some stuff that you've been already seeing, but you can look at that at your leisure. Let's look at the code. Copy that and move it over to Visual Studio. And you'll notice at the top, we have our create function, same one we've been using the entire time. And this time we're going back to returning the encoded version. Wonder if that's a problem. Oh, it's not. Okay. Boy, that's confusing. Let me go to documentation and see if I can explain that. Let me cover this first because this could kind of bring everything to its knees and make things confusing. What I noticed up here, let me kind of walk you through what I noticed. I noticed that back in our create function now, instead of returning the raw PDF doc like I did last time, I'm back to returning the full URI, the base 64 encoded one, the same one that we're sending to FileMaker to render in the browser. And I was curious, well, why am I doing that? I'm doing that, it's being returned here, and I'm dumping it into my global variable. So on our last screen, this global variable was holding the raw PDF document object, but now it's holding the base 64 encoded object with data URI. So the same thing that FileMaker has. And I was wondering, well, why did I do that? Well, it was to show you another option, and I'll show you in documentation here in a minute. What we're going to do when we add text to it is, in order to add text to the document, I'm going to have to pull it in locally, just like I did before, right? Into a local variable. And I'm going to pass that up here to my modifier, and it's going to come in right here. And what I'm going to do here is load it, not create it. I'm going to load it into this variable. So let's go look at this load documentation so that you can see what's going on here. Here's the load documentation right here. Up above was the create. Well, we've already created it, but now we're going to load it instead. And look at what it has up here. It's got 3 different options of what you can load. So it's got 3 different kinds of PDF objects that it can take and understand and work with. And it's kind of confusing. This kind of tries to explain what those 3 different things are. But look at what the first one is. You can load a PDF that is a base 64 encoded string with or without data URI. So this is not going to break anything. This means I can load it using that encoded string, the same thing I'm passing to FileMaker. Or I can load the raw bytes of a PDF as this type of array, or I can load the raw bytes of a PDF using an array buffer. So there's a couple different ways that I can load up a PDF. For instance, here's the base 64 encoded small PDF, and here is adding the data URI to it, and here's where I load that. I'm loading the base 64 version, and that's totally acceptable. Or I can load the data URI version, which is the same base 64 encoded with this appended to the front of it, and that's what our browser uses to render it. Or I can use the other 2 types. So back in my code, that's what I'm doing here. I'm loading, instead of a raw set of bytes, I'm going to load the base 64 encoded version. So that's why I chose to save that one instead. Man, I made that kind of confusing. When I did that at the time, it was like, oh, good, I'm gonna show another option. But now I realize in trying to explain it to you, oh man, I just opened up a whole new can of worms. I'm gonna go back and take a look at what we got here in this section. I've got my create function here that we've been using slightly modified. It's modified only to the extent of what I'm returning. Instead of returning the raw PDF document information, I'm actually sending back the base 64 encoded with data URI that I'm actually sending to FileMaker. That's what I'm returning. Here's, I can get rid of that. Here's where it's coming back in right after when we called it. This is dumping to the console log that it was successful. Here's where I'm storing that for later up here in our global PDF doc, so I can use it later. And I'm sending it off to FileMaker. Okay, so that's the one and only change, is just what I'm returning. Instead of returning this object, I'm returning this object. Okay, that's the only thing that changed. So it's being created in FileMaker. What does that look like? Clear out everything, go to browse mode. There, we're clear. That's doing that. Okay, this is what's being rendered in our browser, but that is the data I'm actually saving for later. So that's all of that. Okay, next up, this should look familiar. I don't think anything changed. This is optional. This is what runs the get size button. And I say optional because everything else works whether you use get size or not. Get size is like a utility. If we were to create a document that was A7 or legal or some other optional size, we could use the get size button to see what it actually is in points so that we can figure out where to place things, right? Because then our coordinates are going to be totally different based upon the paper size. So the get size can be useful, but it's not required. But in code, we had this last time and it hasn't changed. What we've changed, or did I change something? No, it looks the same. Okay. What we did change is we added a new function here at the bottom, add text. Whoops, boy, that flew by. Okay, so this is what's new. This is where we added some text onto the screen. Remember how we added the word watermark and it was really small off there on the left? This is what ran. Now you'll notice that it's in the same type of layout or syntax or grouping that we did with the create, in that this is what runs. This is our parent function that's called here, add text. We're passing in 4 parameters this time. Okay, so this is the parent function that runs, and here's what it does right there. And what it does is it declares 4 variables and then runs our child function, modify PDF. And we pass in 5 parameters. And that's here. That's our async function called modify PDF. And here's where we're bringing in the 5 parameters. And it's got to try, catch, just like we did up in the create. So I'm keeping the structure identical. I'm just changing what I'm doing inside of it. And this one not only has a dot then when it's done, but it also has a dot catch just in case. Probably is never going to trigger, but just in case it's there, some error handling. And when we get back that modified PDF, here's where we're going to get it. We're going to set it back into the global, and we're going to pass it on to FileMaker. Okay, so if we go back and look at that, that's when I click. Let's make watermarks. Let's have it go somewhere else. Let's put a X position of 350 and a Y position of 200 with, let's rotate it just for giggles, 45 degrees. And there it is, right there, tiny, because we haven't defined any font type. So it probably did a default, either that or I'm describing it in code. Let's look at the code. Right here, size 12. Yeah, so it's putting our text watermark right here, size 12, at that X and Y position at that rotation. Okay, so you see what's going on. You see the structure. It's getting a little bit more complicated, but really, as long as we keep the same structure, we're just adding more code that looks similar to what we've already got to try to not get too confused. But let's look at the parameters we have coming in. From FileMaker, we're expecting to get 4 parameters. How are we doing that? We haven't seen that before. So let's look at FileMaker script, and we're calling it here. And I'm getting the 4 variables from our fields on our layout, the X and the Y and the rotation and the text, dumping those into variables. Then I'm validating. I'm just doing some basic data entry validation, which means, hey, if you've left some of these blank, exit and show some custom dialogues that, hey, that's a required field. So that's not really too important. That's just some data validation. Here's where it runs that JS function called PDFEditor add text. And here's where I pass in 4 parameters. And the order of the parameters matter because this first one is going to show up right here. And I don't have to call them the same thing. So it's the order of how you send things in. That's what's going to match it up. So I'm sending in the text and I'm creating a local variable called the text. So I kept it the same, but that's not required. I could call it my text or incoming text, but it's the first parameter coming in. The second one is my position X. And look, I changed the name. I'm going to store it in a local variable called where X. Position Y is being sent, and it's going to be stored in where Y. And rotate is going to be sent, and I'm going to store it locally in rotation. Where are those 4 variables used? I only use them right here. Why did I do this? Well, a couple different things. Number one, I want to make sure my X and Y coordinates are integers and my rotation is an integer, not a string, not a decimal, not a float, not a big int. So I'm using a JavaScript function, kind of like FileMaker's get as number, get as string, same concept. This forces no matter what X is coming in, if it comes in as a string, this is going to try to convert it into an integer as best as it can. If you pass in ABC, who knows what kind of integer that's going to turn out to be, but it's going to be something, might be 0, who knows, but it'll be an integer, a valid integer. And I'm storing those in 4 different local variable names. And then I'm passing these 4 into my modify PDF function, passing those in as variables, as parameters. And then I'm also passing in that global document that we saved here from our create. And as you remember, that's going to be base 64 encoded. Same thing that FileMaker is using to render. So hopefully I'm explaining these things multiple times so that hopefully it's making sense. So go ahead.
Do you have to pass the parameter in the exact same order?
Yes. The order is what matters. The naming scheme does not.
Okay. And the next question, could you have returned the raw PDF and loaded that back into the PDF library?
Yes.
Does it have to be base 64 encoded?
It has to be something that this will generate. So when we remember that save as right here, this save as base 64, this is the library function that runs. They don't have a save as base 16 option. So I'm using the built-in function to generate that base 64. So I'm limited to whatever I can use that they've made available for me to use. Good questions.
I'm not sure what raw byte options means.
I don't either, to be fair. Again, I'm showing you that there's 3 different options, and I showed you how I use 2 of them. The other one, don't know. It's beyond the scope of this class and beyond the scope of my knowledge. So, I mean, what's available to use inside this library is There's tons of things in here that I'm not using. So I'm just trying to show you what I've used and how you can use it in FileMaker. And beyond that, you're starting to ask some questions that I really don't have the answer to, but I haven't had a need to do that, right? So it's an option, but I haven't needed to do it. I've just done it this way and it works. Good questions anymore?
To me, it means that you can load the PDF from a local variable / object that is already in memory as base64, or you can pull the PDF from a file somewhere like data URI.
That's possible. Later in this class, we're going to load our own PDF from a FileMaker container, and I'll show you how I did that. But that may or may not apply to what they just said. So yeah. Okay, so the only thing we have not done and we'll do next is we will go into this modify PDF code and see what we did there. Now that we understood how we're actually running it and what we're passing into it, here's what we're doing. First off, it's a try catch scheme, just like I didn't use scheme. What did I use? Structure. Same thing we've done before. It's an async function, right? Same as we did with create PDF. So inside the try, what am I doing? I'm going to dump all of this information into the console for debugging purposes. So here it is. Now let's look at the console. Look at the console. Here it is. And there it is right there. Right there. Text, watermark, X 350, Y 200. So that's kind of handy because I can dump anything I want to on the console, including right here, so that I can see what came in. And I can verify that what I'm expecting to get right in here actually was received. I'm passing in the doc, the text, where X, where Y, rotate. So I want to see those values in the console to make sure that I'm getting what I'm expecting. If watermark is blank, or excuse me, if text is blank and X is 200 and Y is 350, oops, I know I've got something out of order and the rest of my code is going to fail or do something weird, unexpected, because I didn't bring in my parameters the way I needed to. So this is some useful development strategy to dump information periodically into the console, just so you can see if you're getting expected behavior, expecting parameters. So that's the first thing I'm doing. Then I'm going to do that same thing I explained before, which is take the incoming base64 doc that was saved in our global that was passed in right here. I'm going to load it. And that's that load function we looked at. That's right here. And that takes three possible different parameters. And I used the string base64 encoded one here, and it worked. So I'm storing it again in my local variable PDF doc. Then I'm getting its pages, and that returns to me all of the pages in the document, no matter how many there are. And then I'm going to specifically grab the first page, which is index 0, store it in a variable called first page. I'm going to ignore this font because we don't need to embed a font. It's already sitting in there. This was obviously copy and pasted, and that was just disabled. Actually, that's incorrect. It looks like I changed my mind. I was going to use my Times Roman I used before, but this time I changed it to Helvetica. So I embedded Helvetica font in this PDF version. And then I draw some text using that font. And you'll notice before we didn't use all of these parameters, and this time we're using a few more. We're using X, Y, size, font. We did that before in color, but now we're using max width, line height, and rotation. And that's all in the documentation for the draw text. And that's on a PDF page. So if we go look at PDF page and we look at draw text, you can see all of the draw text options right here. You don't have to use them. Some of these I'm not using. I'm not using XQ, blend mode, but this shows you all of the optional parameters you can pass in and how to use them. So I've done a few of them here. Rotation requires degree conversion from a numeric, probably from radians to degrees, something like that. There's my line height, a maximum width in case you pass in a whole bunch of text rather than just a short word. I gave it a color, gave it a font, gave it a size and a location. So once I've added that to the first page, then I do the same thing I did before, save the whole thing out as a base64 encoded object and return it back to my parent function and toss something under the console log to make sure that I know that it worked. Comes back into the .then, I receive it here. I pass it back into the global. So this replaces the original created PDF with the new modified one. Again, base 64 encoded. And then I dump it to FileMaker so that it can re-render inside the web viewer. So again, clear everything out. Initialize gives me a bare bones created PDF. I'm going to skip get size. I'm just going to add text. Instead of saying watermark, we're going to say Richard and add that text. And there it is right there in size 12, rotated 45 degrees.
I have one last question and then we should probably wrap up.
Okay.
We have a few PDFs that throw, I don't know, I'm going to copy. I don't know that word. We have a few PDFs that throw a Jets event on iPad and iPhone, both in FileMaker and iOS Preview. Would you expect PDF library to be different? Other apps like OneDrive create with no problem, but not FM.
When I was researching some PDFs, I discovered that not all PDFs are the same. There's actually, Adobe actually made several different versions, and different programs can read and write certain specific versions. So I would say that's probably where the error is happening. I don't know if documentation for this library reveals which ones can have success, which ones don't. That was beyond my research for this project. But that would be the place to check, would be their online documentation, and or that event in a Google search along with pdf.lib JavaScript library. You might find some results to see if somebody else has already answered that question for you, but I have a feeling that's probably what's doing it. There's a couple different versions of PDFs that are created, and they're not all created equal. Why did I use var global instead of constant global? Because I'm constantly changing it. So it's not a constant. It needs to be variable. Const means it's never going to change. And you notice we created one and then we added text to it, right? The whole idea of editing the PDF is making changes to it. So it's going to need to be a var every time. This line highlighted right here is changing the value of global PDF doc. So this would fail if it was a constant. It's a good question, but yeah, you just kind of have to kind of think that all the way through, right?
Is it possible to set page number after FileMaker created a PDF when appending pages?
We will get to appending later. What was the first part of that question?
Is it possible to set page number after FileMaker created a PDF when
I don't think PDFs have a built-in page number. They have an order of pages. So I'm not sure if he means a visual page number on the PDF. And if so, that's just text. It has nothing to do with the actual pages internally. Now, if he's talking about the index of get pages where it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, when you insert something, that order changes, right? It's just like an array. You're pushing something into the beginning. Everything else is going to scoot down by 1. So I think I answered that 2 different ways. It kind of depends upon what they were meaning when they asked the question. Well, we covered some pretty deep stuff today, but we have in the past too. This is kind of more advanced JavaScript. So some of it they're going to understand, some of it they're going to leave kind of scratching their heads. But well, the nice part is this is being recorded so they can go back and try to understand it. And there's good online documentation to try to follow. So
what I'm also going to do is the people who have officially paid you, right, for week 3, which is next week, I'm going to send them a note letting them know that I think they could email you if they have any thoughts or ideas or questions or whatever, because since they're paying you, you're probably much more likely to pay attention to their emails.
They get moved to the front of the line.
Okay.
And like we've preached before with this demo file, feel free to go in and make some minor tweaks. And like Richard said, if he was to stop and pause the recording and go in and play and make changes and figure out what works and what doesn't, that's how you learn, right?
That's how you learn. That's absolutely how you learn. That's how I learned to code myself back when I was in 6th grade.
And I will promise you that while I was building this PDF editor, I had plenty of things that didn't work.
Oh, sure. Absolutely sure.
So what you've ended up with is the finished product. And now I kind of feel like I can go back and try to explain what I did. But you can use the documentation and little pieces and parts that you pick up here and there to poke and prod and change to your heart's content and see what works and what doesn't.
Catch everyone tomorrow for Friday shenanigans. And don't forget, tomorrow is not the last day of the free training. We've added one extra bonus free day on Monday.
Cheerio.
Yep, everyone have a good one. Bye.
report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir.